FTX, Binance, they've all been offshore. Binance has survived this long. They're probably going to fail at some point in time, whether it's now or 5 years down the road or something. Next time there's a big upturn and a crash or something like that. They're playing with the house of cards. They're just the biggest player.
Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I am here with Brandon Keys from Green Candle Investment. He's got a couple podcasts?
Yeah, a couple podcasts.
Couple podcasts, and we're going to do an interview, and we're going to talk about crypto and I don't know, a bunch of other stuff I have no idea about, and Brandon's going to enlighten me and explain different situations, and some situations I kind of feel like I know about, and some I absolutely have no idea. So, all right, so check out the video. First thing I want to get out of the way, so you don't know this because you probably don't watch my channel, is that I have been wanting to paint this wall, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to paint this wall red. Well, dark red like it is. It's actually dark red. It's not just red. It's dark red. It's like crimson or something, right? I don't know. So I've been wanting to paint it forever, and my now wife would not let me because, you know, I rent this place, you know, it's work, and you know, but I also, it's like, I'm like, okay, well, I'll paint it, you know, when I'm done, like it,
you'll paint it back white.
Yeah, of course, I'll paint it.
Yeah.
But so it was back and forth, back and forth. This has been going on for a year. And so finally the other day, she's like, all right, you can paint it, because I kept complaining. I just hated the setup that I had changed it and set up. I had some shelves back there, and I didn't like them, and the whole thing. So I wanted to put this wall back and this wall and set up the way I used to have it set up in my old apartment. So finally I did that. And so this is the first day. This is the first episode
with
in
the red
studio
wall.
with the red wall. And so I want to know if my shirt's messed up. So
just flex a little bit, right? Tighten it up.
Get
Get the dryer working, extra medium.
So I need feedback. So I need feedback if anybody like that. Listen, there's no way anybody's gonna not like this wall. This looks good, and it looks great on camera. I mean, you and I see the rest of the junk around here, but on camera it's gonna look good.
Oh, I think it looks really good.
People are gonna think you're like in a real studio.
Yeah. Legit. I mean, like I said, when I walked in, I was like, "Damn, this setup's legit, man."
It does appear that way. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. It's like, you know, people are like, this guy the other day looked at me and he's like, "Man, you work out, like you're buff. You're like you're." Listen, bro, this is all for show.
The dryer's working hard, dude.
Yeah, trust me, I'm weak. I barely work out. I go through the motions. So, all right, are you ready? Are we going? No, I'm just okay. So, all right. So what are we talking about? Listen, I don't know. By the way, I don't know anything about crypto.
Yeah,
like I know the minimum.
All right. Well, let's start there then. All right. So let's back it up, right? So I'm a Bitcoin guy through and through. So Bitcoin only. I have my podcast, State of Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. There's a big difference between Bitcoin and crypto, and I kind of want to go through the differences with that first, so you can kind of understand like how people have been scamming left and right. So Bitcoin, it got really popular with blockchain, right? Everybody kind of hears blockchain technology, all this and that. Biggest difference with Bitcoin is there's proof of work and proof of stake. So proof of work is what Bitcoin uses, and proof of stake is like a protocol what like Ethereum or some of these other cryptos use. So what proof of work essentially does is every single time there's a transaction, there's a miner that has to run and operate and basically run a mathematical equation to determine, you know, if this is correct. And each time a transaction goes through, it's run through a node as well. And then that miner, once it's kind of going through this whole circulation thing, the miner receives a reward. And what this reward is some Bitcoin, right? So every time you transact back and forth, I send you some Bitcoin, a miner receives there's some sort of network fee, right? So with this, it can be completely decentralized because there's no barrier to entry. You can have a miner, he can have a miner, I can have a miner, somebody in Argentina could have a miner, somebody in China can have a miner. And all of this helps basically run this entire Bitcoin protocol.
So, okay. So if it's actually based on something, which I'm not even positive what you just said, but if it's actually based on something that you're saying is what, semi-stable, then why does it fluctuate?
So it's fluctuating based on the US dollar price, right? So what Bitcoin did, which every other cryptocurrency hasn't been able to do, is create digital scarcity. So basically you can go through the whole entire code and protocol. It's all open source. You can go and verify this yourself, but there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever created. You'd have to basically get every single person that has a node, miner, all that kind of stuff to agree that they want to increase that supply, which basically it's like theoretically impossible, right? To get like millions of people to agree on one thing. Whereas in Ethereum or some of these other cryptos, they use what's called proof of stake. And so they have miners and other things like that, but what this staking does is basically, like you've heard the staking rewards and other things like that, but essentially the top dogs control that entire market. So I believe you need like anywhere from like 100 or 60 Ethereum in order to mine, whereas like in Bitcoin mining, you don't need anything, right? So you need a certain amount of Ethereum to, a lot. So Ethereum at one point was like $4,000. So one ETH, 60 times 4,000 times 60,000 or times 60, that's a big barrier to entry to be able to kind of control that protocol. So essentially Ethereum and all these other ones are not decentralized like a Bitcoin, or I guess Bitcoin is really the only one that is decentralized. So Ethereum has a lot of these nodes and everything else on AWS. So theoretically, if the SEC or somebody else were to kind of investigate Ethereum, they could go to Amazon and say like, hey, like quit hosting these nodes on this, and they can essentially shut down Ethereum. So there's a lot of, I guess, single points of failure for a lot of these cryptocurrencies.
But they can't do that with
Bitcoin, right? So we've had China and some other countries try to ban Bitcoin mining, saying it's bad for the environment or something else like that. Whereas,
is that true? How's that true?
So they say it's true because it uses a lot of power, right? So, you have a MacBook right here. So you can't like mine Bitcoin off your MacBook anymore because there's so many in circulation, right? It takes a lot of power. I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole if you'd like, but essentially, every 4 years it gets harder to mine Bitcoin because they call what's the halving event. So every 4 years, the amount that can be mined per block is cut in half. And that's just kind of like, I don't know, the logarithmic function that is Bitcoin. So all the Bitcoin won't be fully in circulation until 2132. So it's not going to be a long time, but 90% of it is already in circulation now. So you see like kind of the logarithmic function here. Basically, brass tacks is that Bitcoin cannot be controlled because it is decentralized fully, right? Because there's so many people that can have access to the protocol that have a say, that have no barrier to entry, whereas every other crypto, there's a CEO, there's a marketing department, there's something along these lines that controls it. There's a kill switch on every other crypto except for Bitcoin.
So it's able to be manipulated by at least one or two people as a result of Bitcoin, which is monitored just by the market in general?
Yes, 1,000%. So, I mean, there could be like market makers, right? There could be whales that essentially, sell a bunch of Bitcoin for a cheaper amount and like kind of manipulate the price that way. But, that happens in the stock market.
Yeah,
that happens in everything.
Happen anywhere. Yeah.
So it happens theoretically anywhere, but people just kind of point to Bitcoin's volatility on that, right? But you got to think it's volatile to the U.S. dollar because there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin, right? But gas prices change every day. And if we were to allow probably gas stations or, there was an incident in Venezuela at some point where, if you go to a bar and you get a beer, 5 minutes later, whenever you go to the next beer, that beer price is changing. So that's how volatile Venezuela's currency was at one point in time. We have the luxury of living in the United States, so we've never really had to deal with anything like that,
right.
Generally speaking, where you go to the grocery store, you go to a bar, you go to some of these places, go to a gas station during the day. Like, relatively speaking, gas is pretty stable throughout the week,
right.
know. So,
So it'd be like hyperinflation after World War One in Germany or something, right? Like they're just printing so much money, it just becomes it has no value at all.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's kind of like lining it out here. That's just basically Bitcoin can't be manipulated, but other cryptocurrencies theoretically can. And so, because these other cryptos essentially have marketing teams, CEOs, all these other things, it's brought in a lot of bad actors, right? So the biggest name that everybody's probably heard of at this point is FTX.
Right.
But there was companies before that failed, right? So there was, the first one was probably Celsius Network that kind of, got on, and then it was FTX, and then now there's some other players kind of in the game. But, when it comes down to it, a lot of these exchanges, what they do is they market some of these other crypto coins, whether it's, Ethereum, AVAX is another bigger one, Solana, some of these other, I guess, bigger cryptocurrencies. These marketing departments pay money to have them go on to, XYZ exchange. And that even includes Coinbase, right? So, I mean, recently we've had, money laundering stuff go on with Coinbase and their kind of CEOs and higher management as well. So I don't know.
Was that the Russian thing that?
Yeah. So essentially, what happened was I don't remember the exact position of these guys, but it was like CFO or something like that. It was very high up. Basically, they had the knowledge of Coinbase is about to list whatever crypto in the next wave. So what they would do is they would go on a different exchange that offers this, buy up a bunch of it, and then Coinbase lists this crypto. They market it to their millions of people that are on that exchange. People buy it up, it inflates the price. Then the CFO, whoever bought a bunch of it, just sells a bunch of it off. So basically, just pump and dump.
Yeah, it's a pump and dump.
I mean, it's kind of key case in point. But Coinbase has kind of gotten away with that, so to speak, so far. But other exchanges haven't, right? Because there's been, like I said, FTX and Celsius. So the two big flags that they've had is essentially, they've had their own crypto token. So what you can do, I could do it, anybody could theoretically do it, go and create their own cryptocurrency. Low barrier to entry. You just essentially need to know how to code a little bit. And, with GitHub and like YouTube videos and all this other kind of stuff, like you could probably figure it out in a couple days. But what these companies did was essentially they would offer a bunch of cryptos, offer extremely high yields up to like 18, 20 even %, and say like, hey, buy this and you're going to get back 20% in that crypto.
Are they guaranteeing that, or they're just?
It would be a guaranteed rate,
Oh,
and they would pay it out.
It seems illegal. Like that's like you can't guarantee a rate. Like
exactly, but they would do that over a month. Celsius would pay out every week. Some companies would pay out monthly, but theoretically that would be almost like paper crypto that would be on your account.
Is that like the crypto queen? That's what she was doing, right? She did that over like several years, 2-3 years.
Yeah,
never even had a coin.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that's the biggest problem is that it would be like, you go to your bank account, right? You put in, I don't know, $1,000 in there, you're getting 20% back. But then like when you need that $1,000 after you've gotten 20% for a couple years or whatever it is, you can't pull it out. And that's basically what's happened.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. Is like what they would do is they would say, Celsius Network offers their own crypto. They say, hey, we'll give you 10% on your Bitcoin when you deposit it with us. But if you buy some of our token, we'll give you 15%. So it inflates their own token price, right? Because it gives you an incentive to go and buy their token, right? So people keep buying up their token, keep buying it up, and they're giving people higher yield on other cryptos. So they're just leaving it in there, right? They're leaving it on these exchanges, Celsius, FTX, and whatever. So what essentially happened was, there was one big player that had a bunch of whatever token it was, like Celsius, the Celsius token, FTX token, and they would go to these banks. A lot of just normal U.S. banks, or not even U.S. banks. A lot of times it was like offshore banks. There's some like a lot in the Bahamas, essentially. It's all kind of like linked into this one bank in the Bahamas. But essentially they would go to this bank in the Bahamas. They say, hey, we have 1 million of this Celsius token that's valued at I don't know, $10. Just give or take. I'm just tossing out
Right,
numbers
right.
here. But all right, so we have $10 million worth of this crypto, and it keeps going up at this rate. Let's borrow against it. And so they would borrow against it, get real US dollars, and they wouldn't really essentially, the yield that they were offering on these other tokens, they weren't really getting.
Right.
They were claiming they were kind of have this algorithm, they were trading whatever. So they were basically playing just, a house of cards, and they would get a bunch of these crypto tokens, a bunch of yield, and then get it backed by US dollars from a loan. And then, some player would come in
Collapse.
with a bunch of one token and then just sell it all off. Then everybody who owned that token would fall out. And then, the bank would come say, hey, now you need to pay out this loan. And then,
which was collateralized by this token that was worth $10 and now is worth $1, if that.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And so now they have no collateral. They lent $5 million on what they thought was worth $7 or $8 million, and it turns out it's not even worth $100,000 at this point. They just lose everything.
Yeah, it was backed on nothing. Right. Like I said, like I told you, no barrier to entry. You can create one out of thin air and just say hey, there's so many tokens. So a lot of these, companies like Celsius, for example, what they did was they would say they were burning tokens to try to make it deflationary. So they would create, 20 million tokens, and then they say hey, we're burning token. Yeah, we're burning 5,000 tokens a day, or we're burning 100 tokens a day, and that would cost them money because essentially you can't offer any more of these tokens because they're theoretically making it more scarce. But in the end, it was just all a giant Ponzi scheme where all these people, they're trying to convince people to buy into their token. It gets sold off, and then guess who gets left holding the bag is the retail consumer, because all the big players, they're going to get settled out eventually. So, essentially that's what happened with, Celsius and FTX. But, there's still some of these companies out there that are doing this same thing that have essentially survived through this first initial wave. So FTX made a lot of waves because obviously, they had FTX Arena in Miami for the Miami Heat. They had Tom Brady. They had a bunch of these big celebrities marketing for them. And, a lot of people just essentially kind of saw the writing on the wall and pulled a bunch of their money off of FTX. So I think they pulled $4 billion off of FTX within a weekend. And that caused them to halt withdrawals. So if you didn't get it in time, you didn't take your money off at a certain period of time, you were the one kind of left with your money on FTX that's just theoretically there.
So it was a run on the bank. So it wasn't. So I kind of know. I forget what was his name. His competitor that you just mentioned the name.
Binance.
Binance, the kind of the head of Binance, kind of started that ball rolling.
Yeah. So these companies, Binance and FTX, started somewhat together. So it's
and then they broke off.
It's kind of hairy how they broke off too. It's CZ is the guy who started Binance. He was the first investor in FTX, and so he bought up a lot of FTX's token. He basically went to them hey, I think you guys are too leveraged. And the story is that he sold off a lot of this FTX token, which caused it to crash, which caused them, they were basically over collateralized at that point. And because of that, FTX failed.
It was going to fail. It was going to fail anyway.
It was going to fail anyway. Exactly. But the bigger issue too is everybody was doing all this and kind of I don't know. It's almost like the GameStop kind of YOLOing in, people just jumping on a trend.
Yeah.
They were doing that, but at a significantly larger scale in a company and using retail consumers' dollars for all this. So in the end, when you go to a Coinbase or one of these other companies and you buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever, they're supposed to have some sort of proof of reserves, proof of that they bought that token for you. So if you went there and you wanted to pull it off and go to either another exchange or cold storage or something like that, you could do that. But turns out they weren't even really doing that. So, CZ and FTX, he was the first investor into FTX, and they both use the same bank. They both have kind of all been interconnected. And at one point, CZ and Sam Bankman-Fried, who founded FTX, they were working together. And I guess because the the exchanges both got too big. They couldn't be, I guess, seen working together too much because it would be almost like monopoly in a certain extent. So Sam Bankman-Fried bought out CZ. We don't really know if that actually happened or not, but theoretically that happened. I don't know. There's rumors out there. There's theories that Sam Bankman-Fried really didn't buy out CZ, and because of that, that was why he kind of sold off all of his token and kind of made it collapse. I don't really know the full extent of all that, but what I do know is that Binance is still doing what FTX and what Celsius did, is that they're giving loans at almost like 0%, where you very low collateral. You just have to give up a certain amount of Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever token you want, and you can borrow against that. They have their own token. They're offering people very high yields.
Right.
But what recently just happened, well, within the past, like, I believe week or so, is that you cannot now put in US dollar transfers into Binance. So whatever, something happened in the background that we don't really know about, that's probably going to come out in the next, I don't know, few months or so, because it's come out that the SEC is now investigating Binance. And so because of that, basically all the banks have said, like, hey, if you want to deposit US dollars into your Binance account, we're not going to allow you to do that anymore. So it's essentially cutting off the on-ramp, because Binance is doing something probably similar to what FTX and Celsius and some of these other guys were doing. But the interesting part of this is that FTX, Binance, they've all been offshore. They haven't been U.S. companies. Right. And they all have an arm, like it was FTX US. Yeah. And then now they have Binance US. And so now Binance US is cut off, but everywhere else is still able to operate. And the U.S. seemingly has a little bit more stringent, policies when it comes to this. But when it comes full circle, Binance has survived this long. They're probably gonna, fail at some point in time, whether it's now or 5 years down the road or something. Next time there's a big upturn and a crash or something like that. I mean, it's essentially they're playing with the house of cards. They're just the biggest player at this point. So, there's a lot of kind of sketchy stuff going on behind the scenes that is kind of starting to come to light with a lot of these, crypto scams. And because of that, it's bringing a lot of, I guess, negative light to, Bitcoin, which is theoretically like decentralized and other things like that. So I don't know. It's all kind of, you've seen FTX and everything kind of topple. So I think that there's going to be definitely more blood in the streets here in the next few years or so, to say the least.
So I have a question. Does the economy going down, or slowing down, or, going into recession or a depression or anything, does that affect like you're saying, the dollar? But it's like typically, not now so much, but typically, when the dollar gets weak, right? So people start dumping money into gold and other products like that. That's not really happening now for some reason. I forget what they call it, but what the issue is. But I'm wondering, like, I've heard that, well, people dump money into Bitcoin and crypto when that happens. But I also heard that several years ago. I don't know if that's still what's happening. Yeah.
So, they've essentially thought of it as like an inflation hedge, right? So, it is kind of an interesting time, because the dollar has been actually like doing pretty well if you think about it compared to other like fiat currencies. And so what a fiat currency is just like, a state-backed currency that isn't backed by gold or anything else. Right. So, it's doing well compared to the euro. The only one that's really not doing well is, I believe, the ruble, or whatever Russia uses. So, and, that's a whole nother situation in itself. But yeah, I mean, if the economy does bad, I think a big part of it, my biggest theory as to why FTX and a lot of these companies were able to do so well and kind of blow up, get all these marketing dollars, get all these people behind them and kind of inflate these cryptos, is because we've had a low interest rate environment for the past decade. Right. So we've had, easy access to capital where people can just go to a bank and say like, hey, I'm doing something on Web3 or, whatever, like these companies went from non-existent and then 3 or 4 years down the road, they're billion-dollar valuations. Like when does that ever happen?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really make any sense onto how that could even happen. And a lot of these companies just, like I said, it's just, they had a bunch of investors and people just throwing money at them. And
it's just the I was going to say the business model alone that you just said, like, hey, if you put money in our company, we'll give you 15%, and then they're lending that money out at 0%. Well, how are you making money? Like, how does that? Well, there's fees and this and that. Bro, what are those fees? Are they more than 15% on every single dollar transaction? Like, it's not that high.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's not even close to that high. And I mean, like some of these ones, like, I'm not quite sure on Binance, but I know on Celsius, you couldn't buy on there. You would have to buy it on a Coinbase or something and then transfer it onto there. So there wasn't even like a really good on-ramp for Celsius, but people would buy it on, Coinbase or something on the other, which charges a high fee compared to the rest of the industry. But you buy it there and then you can transfer it onto Celsius and then they'll give you 15%. And that's basically what happened is like all these cryptos promise yield. They say like you can stake, you can do all these other things and you can get 10 to 15% or higher, and the marketing behind it was all these dirty banks are screwing over the little guys, and they can really offer the entire world 7 or 8%, but they're just not doing it. When in reality, we all know that's not true.
Law enforcement often questions him, not because he's suspected of a crime, but because they find him fascinating. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't typically commit crime, but when I do, it's bank fraud. Stay greedy, my friends.
Support the channel. Join Matthew Cox's Patreon.
You know who Chris Marrero is? My buddy who believes in that. Look, did you see his face immediately? It's like, oh my God, this guy. So you know what a sovereign citizen is?
Yeah,
I would love to see you and Chris sit down and talk. Because he'll do a whole, not a skit because he believes it. He'll do a whole thing on how money doesn't exist, and he does the whole, in 1918, he does the whole thing on you don't have to pay income tax. And this is a guy who got like, God, what did he get? Like 15 years or something in prison.
Oh damn, yeah.
For running it was a tax scam where they convinced people like if you've borrowed a mortgage, the banks, what they do is they fractionalize that mortgage, and he goes through this whole thing, and basically, so they actually owe you money, and you can file a 1001 ID or some tax form.
Oh damn!
And you file it, and they'll give you money back, and they will, because basically, if you ask the IRS, if you filed right now and said, hey, you owe me $30,000, and I made this much, and you owe me, like they'll cut you a check.
Yeah.
Now granted, they'll figure it out in 3 months or maybe a year.
They'll audit you at some point.
And then they're going to come back and go, we're going to need our money back.
Yeah.
So, but it's funny because he's insane. Like he would go nuts, and he's so positive about it. And the problem is, you're level headed. So I could see you going, no, Chris, that's not how. No, listen to it. He'll break out books and stuff. And it's funny because I was talking to him the other day. He called me and was like, hey, listen, I got this guy. And then we got on the phone. And the guy equally thinks he's insane.
Yeah.
And so Chris, I started mocking Chris with the guy we were talking to on the phone. And Chris was like, no, that's not what's happening. So we're going back and forth. And all of a sudden I go, what's the funniest thing about, because this guy mentioned, hey, I actually know a lot of guys that are sovereign citizens just like Chris, because they all believe everything. They believe in Bigfoot. They believe the pyramids were put here by aliens. Like they all believe they've melded together every single conspiracy that's out there. So I remember I said, the problem is, Chris, like you would have more credibility. You and your people would have more credibility. I said, if you weren't renting someone's spare room. Like, I've never met one of these guys who's got like 5 Lamborghinis, and he's got a 15,000 square foot house that's worth $20 million. Like, they're always on the cusp of figuring out how to break the system and break in the system, but at that moment they just happen to be sleeping on a park bench.
Yeah,
they happen to be living in their car or someone's spare room. It's like, Chris, I've never met one of you guys that's successful. You know everything. We're all fools. We're all fools. But in the end, you're renting someone's spare room and you're paying your rent with dollars.
Yeah.
So what's happening here? And he starts laughing. He's like, no, you watch. When I get my when I file I'm like, oh God. When you go back to prison, he's just. But I would love to see you sit down and explain this whole thing.
Honestly, you'd probably love it because like a big book in the Bitcoin space is A Sovereign Individual, which I'm sure he's read before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like people that's basically the whole premise, right? Is that you don't need a government to control your money because it's like all kind of that protocol. And then, even further in that, it's the Bitcoin space is now, all right. Before it was the Silk Road, right? Bitcoin was being used to drug deals over the internet because you can't really trace it. You can do it non-KYC, which is know your customer. You can have it like all anonymous theoretically. Like it'll just link to one wallet ID, and if you play your cards right, you can basically have this money or medium of exchange without anybody really knowing. And so, it's gone from that to now people are like, well, you need to know where your food is coming from. So you need to go down the road, shake your rancher's hand, go get this beef from this local rancher down the street instead of this processed meat that we buy in Florida that is maybe ranched out in Georgia or in some other state and then shipped in. And then it's gone from there to now, like, you need to work out all the time instead of being just like a lazy shit. And so you just need to kind of like take control of your full life, which is probably what he's, along the lines, but he's probably more like tinfoil.
He's listening. And the worst thing is that he was always talking about aliens, right? And I used to have my whole theory about aliens where I go, okay, Chris, look, I get it. Like mathematically, is there life on other planets? Yes. Just crunching the numbers, there's tens of millions of planets out there that have life. The likelihood that they would travel across, the galaxy to come and be interested in us or even pay attention to us is ludicrous. Like we have nothing to offer. And then he was like, no, we have water. I'm like, water's abundant in the universe.
Yeah.
Like there's not, we have a planet. If they can travel across the galaxy and travel hundreds of millions of light years and get here, they've solved the problem of energy. They've solved the problem of terraforming. They've solved the problem. They've solved all the problems that we could possibly offer a solution to. It's more like it should maybe I'll give you curiosity.
Yeah,
but that's it.
Yeah, and then like you come to it like, all right, if they know that we have life on this planet, but then there's other planets that they could theoretically like
they could terraform it.
Yeah, then why would they want to even risk it?
Right.
I mean, if it causes an uproar or
in
some
1954
shit.
There was all
those photos are so grainy too, like it's all
there's an
the
agreement.
Black and white, just like
they have an agreement with the world government. I'm like, the world government? Yeah. Oh, you still think that there's the United States and there's Europe? That's not true. He's like, it's one world government. It's being run by the aliens. It's like, oh my God. No. Anyway, but so. I'm sorry, but
no, you're fine. Yeah.
Sorry, back to I would just, it would be hilarious to get them together and just have you guys just talk. He would listen. And the great thing is he'll laugh about it. He doesn't get upset. Like if you buck, like if you say no, that's not. He won't get angry. He gets excited.
Yeah,
but he's not angry. He won't be like, man, fuck you. He won't do that. He'll just go, no, look, I got a book I can show you. Here, hold on, and he'll get the book, and you're like. What are you doing? Like he would show me these books on aliens, and I go, bro, that's fiction. And I said, that's not true. And he'd go, no, and he'd open it up, and it would say like nonfiction. And he'd go, look, it's nonfiction.
Yeah,
it's true. And I'd go, it's printed on Amazon.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
You can print anything on it.
Right, you can put it with no words on it, and call it a business book, and they'll print it. So but anyway, I was gonna say so he sends me stuff all the time. Some of it is but back to what we were talking about before was like some of it's on crypto, and some of it is on like China, and so he definitely would make a great. You ought to interview him.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
like a live stream, right? Like,
yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I'll have to contact you and get his contact information or something like that.
So comical.
Yeah.
So what is? I'm sorry. So back on topic, bro. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
What is the end goal of crypto? Because we were talking about this before. We were talking about like the United States, backing some kind of is it a coin or just a currency?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's essentially two schools of thought right now, right? So there's theoretically a Bitcoin standard where everybody gets on Bitcoin, where it's decentralized, it's not run by any government. But as we know, governments don't really give up power too easily. So, what is going on right now is countries like El Salvador and Central African Republic have made Bitcoin legal tender. And what legal tender means is it's a medium of exchange, which is money, theoretically.
They're in charge of printing?
No. So, obviously they're not in charge of Bitcoin, right? So we've kind of gone over.
I thought you meant crypto in general.
No, I get what you're saying, but they can, theoretically, you can go to some taco stand in El Salvador or like a beach or something, buy something using Bitcoin. And so what's kind of going on right now is that it's either countries are going to that or they're looking into develop CBDCs, which is a central bank digital currency. And so what that does is like, in the United States, for example, right, there's the Federal Reserve and then there's banks, right? And so the Federal Reserve is run by, the government, and then the banks are, allegedly private banks that, obviously they have some issues and other things like that. We've heard Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, they've all kind of had their run-ins with the law. But, these banks are your way to store money and other things like that, your way to access it, credit cards, debit cards, all that kind of stuff, checking, savings account. But what a central bank digital currency would do is essentially eliminate those banks. So then it's a direct line from the government to the person, consumer, the citizen. But then what that does is it allows that government to track whatever that person, citizen, whatever is doing. And so that's already going on in China actually right now, is that China has released a central bank digital currency where theoretically, like, they give you a social credit score then. So,
right. But they're not using that solely, right? They're still printing money.
Yeah, so they're in the process of rolling that out right now, trying to go fully digital. I mean, like, if you kind of think about it right now, the United States dollar as it stands, if you were to try to print get physical dollars for all the dollars that are in circulation, I think you could get like 10% of actual physical dollars.
Right. Because most of it's electronic. It's just on a computer somewhere on a server.
It's just a number, right? So theoretically, like, it's already kind of digital, but what the United States has is that extra step of like a private bank, whereas like the government doesn't have your information. If they wanted to have your information or theoretically freeze a bank account or something, they could do that. We saw that in Canada this past year with the truckers convoy. I don't know if you followed that or anything, but essentially there's a protest in Canada. The government said
they want to get the shot.
Yeah, they're like, if you don't want to get the COVID vaccine or anything like that, you can't work. And then the truckers just, basically protested, and what Trudeau and the government in Canada did said, like, freeze whoever's bank account it is that that is a part of this truckers convoy. And they had cameras and other things like that out there. But the interesting part of all that is that people donated crypto to these truckers to kind of help with the cause, kind of help against the government. Well, 100% of all cryptos were taken except for Bitcoin, and 70% of the Bitcoin that was donated was unable to be confiscated because there's a way you can make Bitcoin like fully anonymous, kind of like I was saying, where it's fully decentralized. So
Well, I thought it all came from like a wallet. Like this, the wallet is still tied to you.
yes, theoretically, but you can have so there's different ways you could do it, right? So whenever you use a miner, right, you could plug in a miner into your wall right now, and then there's, send it to a wallet on your phone that doesn't require you to put any information. So I have, a couple wallets. There's like, it's Moon, MUUN. There's like Satoshi's, a wallet of Satoshi. Like there's some of these other products out there where you could receive Bitcoin from like theoretically like a miner or from somebody else. And you could change that wallet address like a couple times throughout that. So whenever you get that Bitcoin, it's very difficult to be traced back to you. It could be traced back to the wallet, but
you could have met a homeless guy and got his information, opened up the wallet.
Yeah, or you could do that, or you
You know what I'm saying?
you could do that with a homeless guy, or you could just like have the there's like other mixing services that they offer where it's like, hey, you go onto this mixing service, you say like, hey, I'm gonna put in 0.5 Bitcoin in there, and theoretically gets sent around to a couple different people, and you get the 0.5 Bitcoin back. So it makes it a harder paper trail to kind of chase back to you. So essentially a lot of this kind of happened throughout the truckers convoy where, the government was pissed at all these people, tried to freeze bank accounts, but it essentially made a really good use case for Bitcoin because then, they weren't able to confiscate that.
Right.
That
Just made them seem like even more secure. Like, yeah, I said we were secure, but look, they couldn't do anything to us.
Yeah, exactly. So, governments around the globe kind of saw that and observed that, and they're like, okay, like some of them were like, all right, well, maybe we can't stop this Bitcoin thing, so we'll embrace it. So that's what El Salvador did. Central African Republic did that, and some others did that as well. But, some others are now looking into developing CBDCs. So there's a website on there you could even go and look. It's like, I think it's just called CBDC Tracker, where you can go and Google all the countries and see where they're at in this development of creating a CBDC. So like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier with China is like, with that comes full government control. So you could put your tinfoil hat on and say like, this is Big Brother kind of stuff.
Right.
It really depends on the government who's running it, right? So, I mean, China is, communist. So they essentially have a social score for each person. So, whether you condone these things or not, if you gamble, if you watch porn, buy porn, or even if you play video games too late, or maybe, we have a similar situation to COVID where it's like, hey, you tested positive for COVID, you need to lock down for 2 weeks, they could just freeze your money. Easily. They don't have to go through the bank and do all that kind of stuff.
would do that. Xi Jinping cares about his people. He just wants the best for them.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Your problem is you don't understand tough love. That's the problem.
That's
really,
it, yeah.
That's what it is.
No, 100% that's what it is.
He just doesn't want people, like you shouldn't be watching that stuff on TV anyway or on your phone. You shouldn't be going to Pornhub or whatever these guys do. They shouldn't be doing that anyway. He just wants the best for them.
Yeah, he's just like trying to help you not poison your mind and all that. You know, I mean, that's basically it.
Yeah.
But I mean, back to that, it's a big reason why China banned Bitcoin mining. At one point in time, they were the leading country of Bitcoin mining hash rate. So what the hash rate is just, however many miners are in one location. Because of, internet and other things like that, you can kind of track where these miners are like located. Obviously you can use a VPN and be in other places, but, theoretically you can kind of tell where the hash is coming from. And China was the biggest player at one point in time. And then, they went and banned Bitcoin mining. There was videos going around on the internet of like those big, those big like cement trucks just like running over Bitcoin miners, like just banning all these different things. And,
they just go into people's houses and just grab them?
Yeah. And I mean, there was companies out there that obviously, had a big farm and everything, so you couldn't really hide those. But, at one point in time, the biggest threat was somebody kind of, stopping Bitcoin mining, and people didn't really know how that would turn out. But, after China banned it, people either went to different countries with it. Kazakhstan was a big one. The US was a big one. Obviously, people came here, got cheap energy. But actually, like a lot of miners kind of went back online in China. So in the end, like a lot moved, but some definitely stayed in China and are still mining and other things like that. So, I mean, as much as some governments are going to try to stop Bitcoin, it's theoretically like almost impossible to stop at this point. It's like, I don't know. It would be like you need to go to every single person's house in the greater in the globe, go check for Bitcoin nodes, go check everybody's phone, delete all this stuff, shut down the internet. That's theoretically. And if you shut down the internet, we're having probably bigger issues than what's the money. Yeah. So
what do you think? So you think ultimately, but you were saying like ultimately what you think that you think all the governments will eventually embrace some kind of a nationalized currency for each country?
Well, so I think there's kind of two ways this can play, or maybe three ways that this could play out. So right now, the U.S. dollar is like the global reserve currency, right? So like we kind of stated a little earlier, the dollar compared to other fiat currencies has been getting stronger because the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates, which makes it harder access to dollars. Our biggest export is dollars, is the U.S. So countries getting fewer of those, obviously, it makes the dollar a little bit stronger, a little bit more scarce, yada, yada, yada. But what the U.S. could do, which, I've talked about a little bit on my podcast and other things like that, is they could theoretically back Bitcoin or back the U.S. dollar with Bitcoin. So instead of a gold standard like we had at one point in time, we have like a Bitcoin standard where, you could theoretically back the US dollar. If they wanted to have, the ability to still print more money and put more money in circulation, other things like that, that would essentially allow the US to weaponize the US dollar against any other currency and would keep US as the global reserve power.
Because right now China is trying to China and South America and
China, Russia,
what's the name of the currency they're trying to come up with?
Where in the central bank digital currency?
No, I'm saying China's trying to get them to move off of the US currency.
Yeah, so there's already been kind of some movements away from it. So it's it's called the BRICS nation. So like China, Russia, Iran, some of these other like Middle Eastern countries have like already approved to do trades with oil, not using the US dollar. They've actually approved trade in cryptocurrency, whether they use Bitcoin or something else. I don't really know, but it is kind of interesting, right? So I mean, we have the kind of like this geopolitical war going on with Russia and Ukraine, and during all this, Putin has seemingly like kind of embraced Bitcoin mining, trying to get a lot of people to come there and kind of embrace that to maybe move away from the US dollar. So there is kind of some stuff kind of going on behind the scenes. But, back to your original question on the three ways I see it playing out. So first way, the US dollar could be backed by Bitcoin. Second way, we used Bitcoin as a standard where I transact things. Everything is priced in fractions of a Bitcoin sort of thing, which we call sats. So, there's 100 million sats in every Bitcoin, and then there's 21 million Bitcoins. So, it is divisible, but there's a whole lot of it out there. So theoretically, we could price everything in sats. Or the last way that I see it playing out is that, all these governments try to, revolt. They delete on-ramps. So like we're kind of seeing where you can't, use your bank account to go to any of the exchanges like a Binance or like something else to buy Bitcoin. It makes it more difficult, and then they offer people CBDCs. And so because it's easier to use, people would say, I don't really care about my privacy. The government is not going to control my money like that, and then something's going to break out like a COVID where they try to control you a little bit more, and then people start freaking out. So, it's either US dollar backed by Bitcoin, Bitcoin standard, or, the central bank digital currencies, which essentially is the government controlling your money.
Okay.
So, I mean,
I wonder which one do you think? What do you think is the most reasonable?
So, I mean, I would prefer the US to back the dollar by Bitcoin, but I just think the people in power are just kind of too, I guess, ignorant to what is going on. I mean, we're seeing, a lot of countries move away from the US dollar. We mentioned already oil, right? El Salvador, I've mentioned a couple times, made Bitcoin legal tender. Well, I mean, we had, Vice President Kamala Harris come out and say, things about El Salvador. And it's like, how many times has a vice president or anybody in the government gave any notice to what El Salvador is doing? The answer is probably never. And the reason why they're upset that they're trying to move towards a Bitcoin standard is because the way that the US dollar being back, or the US dollar being the global reserve currency, kind of helps the US is that theoretically, as they print more money and inject liquidity, whether it's some sort of financial crisis where they're giving people stimulus checks like we saw a couple years ago,
right,
that's essentially devaluing the US currency. But El Salvador doesn't get any of that in stimulus. They don't get any of those PPP loans or anything like that, but they just suffer from the inflationary aspects of the US dollar printing 60% of its money supply in 2 years. So I think more of these countries that are, we're already kind of seeing it. We're seeing a lot of South America, Latin American countries get onto a Bitcoin standard. I think a lot of countries in Africa are going to start to get onto a Bitcoin standard. And so I think the way that I see this playing out is a lot of countries are going to start to move that way. And either the US is going to panic and do what I said, last ditch effort, make it a US dollar backed by Bitcoin, or, we're just going to kind of move towards a Bitcoin standard. And, you can't make a Bitcoin illegal in the US because it's another country's money. So, are you going to not allow us to come into the US and pay with something or exchange, pesos for the US dollar?
Right.
It doesn't really make any sense. So, within the past year, we've had, I think, El Salvador has been a little bit over a year now where it's been legal tender. We've had, just recent announcements where remittance payments can be paid in Bitcoin from, the US to Africa, the US to Latin America. And, take for that what it is, right? A remittance payment is somebody living in the US paying some money.
Sending money back, right?
Sending money back to their family. So now they have the ability to do that in Bitcoin, or what's called the Lightning Network. And so what that does is essentially kills Western Union's business model, where you can theoretically I could send you $5 from you to El Salvador or something,
right,
you to somewhere in Africa. Whereas Western Union, it wouldn't really make too much sense to send $5
because there's a fee.
Because the fee is $35 or whatever it is. So, they're essentially eliminating that, where the fee on that $5 is nothing, actually nothing. And then once it gets over $100 or something, it's a couple cents. So the fee to do it over the Bitcoin network is extremely cheap, and it's extremely fast, right? So, I mean, if you need money on a Saturday or Sunday, Western Union's closed, but, Bitcoin doesn't sleep, right? I mean, so it's all on the internet and other things like that. So, I mean, it's already kind of starting.
Right.
So, I think that we're going to kind of get that way. But the problem is that the companies or the countries that are adopting this, they're third world countries. There's no really other way to word that nicely. So
developing countries.
Yeah, maybe
there is.
There we go. I mean, hey, wordsmith over here. But I mean, these developing countries, right? I mean, they're not going to turn around within a year or 2 years. It's going to take a lot of time for them to, get to where the U.S. theoretically is right now. So, the U.S. kind of has some room to make some mistakes. And so, how many mistakes they make, how drastic of a mistakes they make, that's all going to affect how, this all really plays out. And it all really relies on the U.S. dollar and, the government's ability to, kind of, I guess, control that power and keep that power. And I think, a big part of that now is kind of coming to light when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, right? I mean, why is the U.S. sending so much money over to help aid Ukraine? So, I mean, I think it's all kind of connected, and it's all kind of a power struggle at the end of the day. And, the crypto Bitcoin industry is one kind of cog that could theoretically take some power away from people who have been in power for a very long time.
He's been known to cure insecurity just with his laugh. His organ donation card lists his charisma. His smile is so contagious. Vaccines have been created for it. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't typically commit crime, but when I do, it's bank fraud. Stay greedy, my friends.
Support the channel. Join Matthew Cox's Patreon.
I understand the basic concepts. I mean, obviously, I don't know how to get 15 servers and start myself a little Bitcoin mining service or farm or whatever. So, but I mean, I understand the basic concept, but I understand that it's backed by something. You can try and explain that again, but since I'm not able to go back to school back in time and get a degree in mathematics or computer science or whatever it is that I would need to understand what you're saying, or you could sit down with me for a week or two and try and go over it. But bottom line is, it's backed by something that's virtually impossible to reproduce, and therefore there's only a certain number of Bitcoins that are going to be released, and therefore they have value because it's limited, and they're able to fractionalize it, and you're able to buy in, and you're able to, and it's accessible to everybody. So, and so it makes it less and less likely that it's able to be controlled by any one person or even a small group of people. Not that there's not the ability to manipulate anything.
Yeah.
But and I understand the difference between that and just basic crypto. Like, listen, honestly, until a couple months ago, I just assumed, well, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency just like all other cryptocurrencies, and I thought the only difference was that Bitcoin was the first one. That's the only difference I ever thought there was. I thought it's just like Ethereum or anything else. I, of course, now know.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even cut yourself too much or, beat yourself up too much about that, because I think that's what majority of people think,
right,
is that crypto and Bitcoin are all kind of one, right?
I'm sorry. The only reason I even know that is because I was looking into the FTX thing, and when they were talking about just producing, more and more of their own coins, and I was like, well, how is this even possible? I thought there was only so many of them. And they're like, no, bro, you're thinking. And so I had to have that explained, and then I had to look up a video that explained it, and then I was like, still didn't quite understand. You explained it better than the video did, that's for sure.
I appreciate that.
So, but I was gonna say, my head just jumped to China and them locking people down, and anyway, yeah, because I can imagine that, and I totally get that too. Like, I was watching Joe Rogan, and where he was saying, I forget who he was talking to, but they were saying the same thing. Like, look, they can easily just say, okay, look, you can only spend this much on meat. Mm-hmm. You can only spend this much on vegetables, on your car payment, on gas, on electric. Like, just because, well, it's in limited supply, so we're only allowing people to spend this much on their electric bill. It's like, whoa, what are you talking about? So, so it seemed like to me a scary concept, but there's so many scary concepts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is that thing, right? I mean, I think the biggest portion of Bitcoin that kind of gets overlooked is that, like what I said a little bit earlier, is that there's no CEO, there's no marketing department, right? So the guy that created it, they don't know if it's guy, girl, group, whatever. It's some coder that was on the dark web.
Japanese guy. I thought it was.
It was by the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto.
Right. I thought that was a real person.
So they don't even know who this is.
Now he's mystical.
Yeah.
I didn't know
and
that.
So,
I thought he was a real guy. I always pictured him with one of those long mustaches, white mustaches, and like a thing,
No, nobody knows who he is. I mean, hey, you could be him. We don't even know.
I promise you.
I know. I'm kidding. But, I think that's like a part that gets overlooked, right? So, I mean, what he did is another way to prove this is that he put a bunch of Bitcoin in cold storage. I can't remember the exact number. I want to say it's like 1,000 or maybe even a little bit more. And he put that in cold storage, and you can track this all on the blockchain. So, what a blockchain is, just essentially digital ledger.
Right.
So you can see when coins move, when people move a big bunch of things. I mean, there's like Twitter accounts that literally just go and track this, like whale alerts or whatever like that, where they see big amounts of Bitcoin moving back and forth. And this one wallet that has I think it's like 1,000 Bitcoin, maybe even more, hasn't moved since 2009 when it started in 2008. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I had something that was worth over a couple billions of dollars just sitting there, and I knew everything about this, and it got to this point, I'd probably take a couple. I'd take $1 billion out.
Every few months, somebody's going under.
Yeah. Hey,
So-
man, I call my shot. I think Binance is going to fail. So,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I could come do revisionist history and we could dive in under the hood or something like that.
Well, you could also explain what's so great about, like getting out now, like when Bernie Madoff's whole thing, you kind of when it failed, right? Like you're kind of watching it happen on TV, right? So, but now everything's happening like with FTX. Like this guy's going on, he's tweeting, he's going on all these programs, he's doing all this. It was like, oh my God, like you're destroying your own case like live. Like what are you doing? Like he doesn't know a world where you can't manipulate media. So I'm sure, his attorney's advice. He's going on media platforms and doing interviews and everything, thinking I can spin this. But the problem is, when you watch those videos, you realize like, oh, you're used to being the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Like you think everybody's an idiot. So when these guys are asking pointed questions and you're trying to spin it, and then they're like, yeah, I understand. But back to the actual question, you're saying that he's doing his whole little stuttering thing where he's trying to spin it and he can't.
Yeah.
So I'm saying these things are going under all the time. So there's always some little Ponzi scheme or some little I almost said Queen of the South. Some little crypto queen scam or something that there's. So you could definitely come back on and we could do that.
Well, I mean, what I always say, and especially in this crypto industry, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So I mean, the word con man comes from confidence because I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried basically had confidence. People, saw the nerdy guy and kind of believed and bought into that. Well, I mean, the same thing's kind of happening with Binance right now, right? I mean, like there's been people kind of digging into that, people, kind of digging in some stuff. Obviously, the U.S. stopped allowing you to transfer stuff into that. And what did CZ do? He went on to CNBC shortly thereafter and spewed his bullshit about like how, oh, don't worry, everything's fine, we're going to figure it out. But, like I said, I think the biggest fault of FTX is Sam Bankman-Fried just isn't, like you said, he's very nervous. And like after he kind of figured out like, oh shit, like the jig is up, he doesn't have that cold-blooded guy in him to go and still lie to all these people, and then all these people pointing him these pointed questions, and he wasn't able to answer it. Well, I think CZ is a really smart guy, and I also think he's a con man. I think he's out there and just just trying to instill confidence into people and say like, hey, don't worry, don't do a bank run, don't pull all your money off of Binance because like, we're fine. Right. Why are you going to pull your money off? We're still able to give you this yield. We're perfectly fine. And so they're
I have a working model here.
Yeah.
You guys put money in, I give you 15% and I lend that money out at 1%.
Yeah.
That's never going to fail.
Exactly, right?
I'm not a mathematician.
Yeah.
But I mean, count.
Yeah. I mean, you got to ask yourself, where the hell does this yield come from? And nobody can ever answer that question. And then when you ask some of these, crypto bros who go like, oh, I believe in XYZ protocol, XYZ coin because it offers this yield, you ask them like, well, it's like a company dividend. It's like, well, a company makes money. Like, a company has a product or a service.
Yeah, you're not making cars.
Yeah.
You're not Tesla, you know what I'm saying?
You're not a REIT, or you're not like one of these things where you're obviously seeing the cash flow come in. It's all built on a Ponzi scheme, and you're just the idiot that's falling for it.
I was going to say, at least with Tesla, at least Elon Musk will tell you, yeah, the stock's way over. It's way too pricey. It's so I don't know why people are paying it. They keep buying it. Like it's like, I believe this guy.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, yeah, you're right. You guys really, it's crazy. Like, but these guys are like, no, it's definitely worth it. Keep buying. Well, of course, your whole model is based on keep buying it. So, okay, well, listen. I mean, so you've got your channel. We already talked about your channel. We already talked about, well, not here. We talked about it when we met at Podfest, because we met at Podfest.
Yeah.
And
shout out Podfest.
Yeah, and Chris K. Did you ever meet Chris, the guy that runs it?
Yeah, I met him a couple times. So I met him. Actually, I got the first exposure to Podfest because I started doing this a little over like 2.5 years ago now. Not so much like YouTube content and other things, but I started like Green Candle, and they had a blockchain and Bitcoin summit in Amelie Arena, which was shared with Podfest. I think it was like late 2020, I want to say, maybe 2021-ish time. So I went there and I saw Podfest, and I talked to Chris a little bit then, and then I went to there's like a podcasters meetup here in Tampa, so I've gone there a couple times. So yeah, I met him through there, and then a couple people from there were just like, yeah, we're going to this Podfest thing, and I'm like, all right, I'll check it out, see what it's all about. So went there for a couple of days, met yourself and a few others. So I mean, it was an awesome time, and yeah, all in sunny Orlando. Right?
Yeah, it was good. I did a talk there. Did I ever tell you how the talk went?
No, you never told me.
He fucking starts laughing. I did a talk. I did a little talk or speech, whatever you want to talk, 30 minutes, right? And then I also did, I was on a panel. So the talk I gave, I went behind a girl. What was her name? Do you remember her name? God, what was her name?
Oh, is he there too?
Yeah. Connor's not with me. It's just we tend to go to the same places, and he shows up, and I'm like, Connor, what are you doing? He's like, hey, what's going on? So anyway, let's call her name Rio. She had a weird name. Let's say Rio. Yeah. So this chick. So I go in to the room, and I'm like, wow, like there's like a lot of people, and there's like 100. Was there like 100 people? Maybe you think more? Maybe.
Yeah, full house.
You're no help. There's 100, 150 people. Like it's packed.
Yeah.
I was like, this is great. So this is okay, cool. Like I was a little bit nervous because typically all I ever do when I do speeches, I just tell my story. I tell a 45-minute version, then people get to ask, and typically it's finance people. So I get the basic same questions, no big deal. But this I was talking about basically like what the do's and don'ts of running a channel.
Yeah.
So I was a little nervous because I've never done that before. So, but I was like, okay, God, but I was more nervous about there being nobody.
Yeah.
So, but I was like, there's like 150 people here. So she gets up, and this chick starts talking, and she has probably given her speech 10,000 times. Like, she was so polished.
Oh, yeah.
And the more she talked, the more I thought, Jesus, God almighty, like of all the people for me to follow up, this is bad. Like this chick, I'm going to have to start off my thing saying like, listen,
she's legit.
If you're thinking that you're about to get as polished of a speech as what Rio just gave, you're going to be disappointed. Like I'm already preparing my apology before I even need to. Yeah. So she gets up, she's like this and this and this, and she goes through all, and she is polished, and she's got all these little tricks she's telling them, and do boom, 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 goes through the whole thing. She also periodically drips little things about how she teaches courses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but not bad. Not like you could tell like this was more of a speech, and I think she was told not to do that. Like you're not here to pitch your product.
Yeah,
you're here to give a talk. So, but she does a little here, a little there, and she does the whole thing. And I could tell, and I was thinking, I don't think she's supposed to say that. Like, but I was like, it's fine, whatever. But like, what do I care? She's going on and on and on. She's got everybody really jacked up. Like, wow, like she really knows what she's talking about. You can make a ton of money just doing what she's telling you. She's telling you all these little tricks, and basically most of it was based on like Twitter and Reddit and formats that I'm not on.
Yeah.
So she gets all pumped up and everything, and she's like, "Okay, well, look, I'm running out of time. I'm wrapping it up. Boom, boom, boom. It's all it's all. This is it. This is it. So look, she said, I know you guys have more questions because people were asking questions. They had their hands raised. She's like, I'm sorry, I can only get to so many. I'm sorry. She said, look, here's what I'll do. Obviously, I also teach a course. If you're interested in the course, or if you're interested, honestly, in just me answering the rest of your questions, I'll be in the hallway."
Oh, man.
So come on out to the hallway. Anybody is interested. And she gets up, and
everybody gets out.
Almost everybody gets up and leaves.
Damn.
And I'm sitting there. I joke around. I'm like, there were 3 people left. But really, there was maybe 20 people left. But I was just like, I mean, listen, it was an emotion. For me, I was like,
yeah, hit to the ego.
I was up and down, up and down. So then I got up, and in a way, I was just like, in a way, you did me a favor because I wasn't going to be able to follow that act up.
Yeah.
There was no way. And, so in a way, great. I only have to disappoint 20 people. So I got up, I talked, I rambled for, 20, 25 minutes, and I was done. And it was like, oh, you were good. You were a little nervous. You could tell you were. So I did. It's fine. But yeah, it was like when she got up, and I mean, they were whoo, and left. I was like, I mean, literally, I kind of just started laughing. I was like, oh my God.
Damn.
This is hilarious. This is really, I mean, I don't really care because, you know, there was a good chance I was going to get, you know, stoned by these guys. But anyway, so yeah, that was my podcast experience. So I won't be doing that again. But listen, what we got to do is, well, one, you have a channel, you have a YouTube channel, right? You have a regular, you have a channel on what? What's the main one on?
Yeah, so both of it's on, so I have one channel, it's Green Candle on YouTube. I got 2 podcasts. One's called the Macro Insights Podcast, and the other's State of Bitcoin. Those are available obviously on my YouTube, but then anywhere you get audio podcasts.
Right, so you rip the audio and you put them on.
Yeah, it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all that kind of stuff.
What do you use to upload them? Do you go to like Anchor?
Yeah, I use Anchor to upload. I use StreamYard to record, just like you, and then I rip the audio and the video. Well, I mean, I live stream. So I live stream the State of Bitcoin one. I do that one every Thursday.
Okay.
Varies the time because I have a guest, but I live stream it on my YouTube and my Twitter's accounts. So my personal and my Green Candle Twitter account. So
thank you, Brandon, for coming on. I appreciate you guys watching the video. See ya.